Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Christy and Peter, for the invitation to be here. I was just commenting that I feel like I'm crashing a family reunion. It's really fun to see all of you connecting each other and celebrating each other and thinking about 3 decades of really delivering value for both the public sector and the private sector. So with a couple of caveats, maybe we'll get started. Those caveats being that you've got a couple of true geospatial data ringers up here, and then 2 or 3 of us who are more generalists, right? So I'll let you figure out who's who. But I think I'm going to give myself away right now and say that when I was protesting all the reasons that I was not the appropriate person to moderate this panel, I was sent some links to read and to prepare myself and try not to embarrass myself or waste your time. And one of those links was to the UN Geospatial website. And I have to say, after 25 years of working in international relations and global development, the first thing I read on this website was actually incredibly helpful and elucidating. And that's not happened to me with most UN websites. No offense to any of you out here. But that was that everything happens somewhere, right? And I think that's just such a compelling and fundamental way to think about the work that you all do and the power of geospatial data. But of course, geospatial data, in fact, any data, is useless if it's sitting in a database by itself, right? The real magic comes from being able to create the rules and the tools to make that data interoperable. So that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this afternoon. I would love to start and have each of you just give maybe a 30-second overview of your role and maybe provide just one compelling example of how you've seen interoperable geospatial or other data work to create new insights and help solve problems. I thought Peter set it up nicely by reminding us all at the beginning of this program that we have to remember why we're doing this, what impact we're having on real people's lives. And given that you're all somewhere along the spectrum of public servants, I think you all have a real commitment to making sure that data does solve real-world problems for real people. So, do you mind if I put you on the hot spots?
No,
right here, Lori?
Great. That's right. Hi, Lori Wade. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the entire intelligence community. If I'm squinting or if I fall out, it's because I just got back from Saudi Arabia on Saturday night, where I went for the largest cybersecurity gathering, I guess, if you will. So in my role, I am responsible for data interoperability across all 18 IC elements. The IC data strategy that we released in 2023 focuses on moving us toward a data-centric approach. The intelligence community is a data organization, and so my focus is making sure that all data, mission and business data across the IC elements is interoperable, is consumable by humans and machines, and to make sure that, that we don't just focus on the collection and analysis, but how are we getting data from collection or acquisition, exploited and disseminated at any time, any place, any security domain, at speed and scale and securely. So I'm responsible for making sure that all of that's happening to all data, to include geospatial.
Across the entire U.S. government IC.
That's correct.
Which
all
everybody
18
here knows what
elements.
IC
Yeah. So it's the
Okay. All right.
If not, we could spend an hour talking.
Okay, well, you must have at least like one very exciting, dramatic example. Or should we just watch movies for that?
Let's just wait.
Okay. Fine. So Lilian, for you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lilian Corral. I am the Vice President of Technology and Democracy Programs at New America. We are a set of programs that are really centered on a vision of a sustainable digital future that advances equitable opportunity, innovation, fundamental rights, and participatory governance. And I bring to that 20 years of experience working mostly at the municipal level as a funder and as a practitioner. I was the Chief Data Officer for the City of Los Angeles, where I worked very closely. I'm a true geospatial data nerd. looking to actually integrate the 41 city departments' GIS systems into an online interoperable data management strategy for the entire city of Los Angeles. And then I've worked with cities across the US in particular in building up their data capacity. And I would say, like, you know, from a kind of use case example, I think what's really important, you know, now in this role, we think about sort of renewing the promise of America and democracy and things like that. And what that really means to the average person is actually getting their, you know, your trash picked up, making sure that your streets are paved, and that you're able to navigate your cities. Like, that's like the core bread and butter. You're able to get to work, to school on time. And so for me, I think a lot of why we grounded our work and a lot of why my work has really focused on geospatial is because I sort of understand that intuitively the value has to go back to the individual and to the resident, and what the resident really cares about is that proximity to their space. And you can't do that, and you can't really look at data unless you start to look at that kind of geospatial level. You look at it at the geospatial level, you look at the lat long and see where things are happening. And then also, the last thing I'll say is this is the place where we really get context, right? A lot of the outcomes and the data-driven approaches that we've been driving really lack context, and it's until we look at it on a map and we start to see the disparities, the changes, and understand visually how things look in a city or in an urban context, that's what enables decision makers to make decisions that are less politically based and more, and I think more data-driven. And so that's one of the features of geospatial that I'm really driven by.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Over to you, James.
Just before I kick off, I'd just love to say, can I just say a couple of words? I've only been in the geospatial community for probably 3 years, about 3 years, and I just wanted to say it's a great community of people, and obviously with people like David and the leadership that he's shown, it's just a really great place to be. And as a newbie to this space, I learn a lot and I'm inspired by it every day. So I just want to get that out there and say thank you before I jump in. My job as CEO of Geoscape, I started in this business 3 years ago, and the job was to try and to reinvent the business. And interoperability is really key to how we have reinvented the business. We are a government-owned organisation. However, we are not a government entity, so it's really clear that we have a mandate. We are a for-profit organisation. Our role is to provide national geospatial location intelligence to industry and also to government. We have the ongoing challenge of continuing to grow and self-fund our innovation as an organisation, but also collaborate with government where we can to provide outcomes to focus our efforts in social improvement and environmental improvements and economic improvements. When tasked with reinventing the business, it was really quite a challenge in that, and I've got some notes here that I just wanted to reference. 3 or 4 years ago in this space, we were working with government, we were working with emergency services, and we were providing really addressing capabilities. To provide location intelligence and addressing capabilities to emergency services, and working with the Australian Bureau of Statistics on addressing in administration boundaries. And in industry, we were working in property. Again, the use cases really focused around land parcel and property intelligence. 3 years later, today we're dealing with government, and I'll just call out the use cases just to show you we're at the bottom of a hockey stick of the hockey stick curve here. And it's quite incredible, and this is why interoperability is so important to our business. But in addition to working with emergency services, we're working on climate resilience, we're working on national emergency, we're working in risk assessment and adaptation, national security, cyber and infrastructure security, infrastructure planning, housing affordability, urban planning. That's with government. And then just to go a step further on industry, the use cases include asset management and asset risk in the finance industry. In insurance, there's general risk assessment, climate risk, claims pricing, and in property, asset valuation and property intelligence. And so you can just see in a short space of 3 years that the engagement with both government and industry it's been exponential growth. And so interoperability has really been key to how we've redesigned the organisation. I don't have to go into too much detail about that now, but it really has been fundamental to the way we've thought about bringing our business and supplying great products and services to our customers and partners.
Great, thanks. Florent?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Florent Bernard, the Science Counsellor of the EU. I'm really happy to be here and share the EU viewpoint on this very interesting topic. First of all, I share the feeling of being in a family reunion. It all makes sense to me now why it's organized today. You all spend Thanksgiving together, right? So very happy to be here. I'm actually here on behalf of Joanna Drake. She's the Deputy Director General for Research Innovation at the European Commission. And she's one of the co-chair of the GEO, together with Dr. Spinrad from NOAA. And the European institutions are trying to green a little bit their activities. So whenever we have to attend an event, we have to look at what is the greenest option to attend that event. And I live around the corner, so I am the greener option for this event. So
You
super
definitely
happy.
beat Australia.
Yes, no offense to the others
Yeah.
who might not have this chance to have someone, but
Yeah.
this is how we do it. So it is an extremely important area for us, and we are so grateful for the collaboration we had for so many years with OGC, and especially with Marie-Françoise Wadreau, who is handling the activities in Europe through a lot of our Horizon Europe and Horizon 2020 project, which I will talk about a little bit. You probably have heard, I mean, there is a lot going on in the US, of course, but we also have since yesterday the new European Commission in place, data and interoperability will remain a very important topic for the new Commission. We are still waiting, of course, for the details of this new initiative, but we already have about 20 to 25 years of directives supporting interoperability and numerous projects that we have funded, and of course our participation in global forums. So this will continue, and with the new layer that we'll talk about later on AI, which is extremely exciting. So in terms of example, well, first of all, for a complex region that is the European Union with 27 countries and numerous level of governance. The country where I'm from is Belgium. We're a very small country, but we've managed to increase the complexity of our country by having 9 different governments. So it's extremely important that we are able to share in a unique framework data because it allows for those different layers to operate together to increase the efficiency. We don't ask those different level to to capture the same data, and of course it creates collaboration and improve the decision making. And I think probably one of the example I wanted to give is for a dramatic example we have recently and more often in the EU is the flood mapping. Most recently you probably have seen the incredible dystopic image of Valencia floods. And it becomes really, really crucial not to rely on one system, because this is one of the failure of what happened in Valencia. There was only one person who had to launch a warning, and it didn't happen. So it's really important that we have all the different layers involved, including satellite imagery with Copernicus, who is giving a lot of information also, but our ground sensors networks, also the media feeds, the social media feeds are a great source of information. And when it's the floods are happening, seeing where the emergency response vehicle locations are and the population density data. So that's just one of the examples. I know there are many others, but I just wanted to give because it's very timely for the EU and important, and show how important the work you are doing is to save lives and protect our environment.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, I think, to all of us that no matter how well you figure out the systems to actually share data, if you don't have the right way to make use of that data and get it into the hands of the people who need it in time, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so the EU is actually a perfect segue to think about one of the real challenges to data sharing that I'm sure you've all faced, which I have learned is not really a technical challenge anymore so much as a challenge of trust and how you get different organizations with different incentives, even within the public sector, comfortable sharing data and knowing that that data is going to be used appropriately and only for the purposes that have been agreed upon. So I wonder, maybe, why don't we start, actually, Lilian, with you, since I imagine this was something that you thought about quite a bit in Los Angeles as you were trying to collect different data sources and make sense of them. And you mentioned that you guys established something called a data hub, right?
Yes. A GeoHub, actually, in partnership with Esri. Yeah, I think from a city context, especially in the US, one of our biggest challenges is that much of the data tends to be, as we all know, locked in individual computers and servers and things like that. And my period of my tenure actually feels really outdated. It was in the 2016, 2017, this is the time when we were building this GeoHub. And so, things were going, cities are still migrating into the cloud, if we can believe that's still, that it's recent and or as a long time ago. But I think a lot of the challenges are, so one, our goal there was to actually integrate all of the city's data. That was an executive directive that we had. And in some ways, what we found was because of the standard and the availability of the geospatial standard available, GIS really became the easiest thing to integrate. That's where mostly 80% of our data was, and I think that is still very much a true kind of number if you think about cities and data. So the potential to actually integrate a lot of that is actually quite easy if we can get through the politics of it. And I do think that some of it is about executive directive, but some of it, I think one of the big things is really bringing together a lot of these different departments and silos in conversation and building the trust. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I have found, and then I think we've seen this in my work since, is that oftentimes in the public sector, we don't really have an agreement around what is the problem that we are really trying to solve for. And so when people come together to really understand what data we will share, when we will share it, and how we will share it, right? If there isn't agreement on the actual problem, then I think that this is where the policy and the politics of it all get in the way. And so for us, we really use the development of this, integration tool, this GeoHub, as a way to bring people together around particular use cases. We focused on various mobility use cases, but in particular, we focused on cleaning our streets. It was a big issue for us at the time. And I think having clarity about what we were going to measure at what micro unit we were going to measure, and where all sort of the relevant possible data was to come together allowed those individual departments to really come into the conversation, or those individual data owners to come into the conversation. It also, with at least clarity about what they were providing and how. And then it also allowed us to actually be able to share data with external actors and be able to engage them in a conversation around, because it's not, city services aren't just for a city, right? And aren't just dependent on the city itself. There is actually a lot of externalities. And so being able to bring all of those groups together, I think allowed us to enable the trust. And again, the geospatial element just made it easier for people to understand their neighborhood and be much more committed or invested in that. I do think, as we sort of move up the sort of disaster, move into the disaster use cases, I think one of the opportunities is, again, we have greater clarity about what the problem is that we're trying to solve for, and also the human element. One personal critique I would say of, individuals like myself who have worked in the civic tech, e-gov, smart cities movement is that oftentimes a lot of that discussion is really focused on the technology and less on the human-centered outcomes. And when we don't actually, and when we're dealing with bureaucrats who own a lot of that data, they tend to be ones who really care about the human-centered outcome, because those are the people that they're dealing with. They care about it in different ways, but that is ultimately their customer and bottom line. And so for us to be able to really get out of our technical discussion and really talk about that, That outcome, I think, actually also helps enable more of the governance discussion. And again, more of the clarity on what the problem is that we're trying to solve for. So I'll stop there without kind of elaborating more, but yeah.
Well, Lori, why don't I turn to you? Because, I mean,
This is the name of my game, right?
trust has to
Yeah.
be quite a high priority.
Yeah, so in the intelligence community, the geospatial collector is NGA, so the National Geospatial Agency. But they collect on behalf of then the rest of the IC, the other 18 elements. And within each, and the missions, right, are more and more becoming cross-int, so multi-int. Taking a look at that and understanding how we're going to move data that's siloed across a distributed data ecosystem has come down, and also not just within the IC, but we have the responsibility to share with the DoD. So when we look at the data-centric experience that we're trying to build and create, the warfighter is part of that, right? And so understanding how data gets from collection, whether it be through exquisite, highly classified, to open source, and commercially available, to be exploited, and then disseminated out. We have to look at every aspect of the data, because we have legal requirements, right? We care a great deal about the authorities on which data is collected, PII, civil liberties and privacy. All of that has to be factored onto the data. So data labeling and the conditioning of data is of great interest to us, especially now as we go forward, especially in being able to take full advantage of large language models and anything coming after that. A lot of the glitzy technology, all of it relies heavily on quality data. So getting to quality data. So I co-signed a joint ontology, core ontologies, ending the 15-year ontology wars with the DoD and the IC. That's great. So now we're going to start to implement that, right?
You should get an award for that, Peter. Get on
Right?
that.
Please. But things like that. We have a shared lexicon. We just released, all of this is unclassified, so we could engage with the private sector. We have a new data reference architecture that shows how we want to integrate and have the interoperability at the semantic layer. So it's based on data mesh principles. All that's to say that any of the MOUs or data sharing agreements or anything that's in place, we can no longer just rely on that, right? It has to be, the data has to carry the data forward. And one of the biggest challenges that we've had is this distraction, I call it a distraction, this is where people are like, of AI for the intelligence community. In the federal government, and I would even say the private sector, because the focus has been so far on this end of the technology piece of it and not the foundational pieces. And the foundational pieces are the data labeling. If you saw in the news recently, the director NGA just putting an appeal out to the private sector, but also has an ask going forward for $800 million for data labeling. So it's the biggest ask for data labeling that's happened in the U.S. government, but a very important one. And then also, how are we going to then ensure that that data, as it moves through the systems, carries those tags and labels with them? Because in the intelligence community, unlike the private sector and out in the world, we care a great deal about explainability
Yeah.
and verifiability of data. And so that piece of it is so critical as we move forward. And it's going to be a huge focus, I think, and a challenge for almost every organization
Yes.
in the coming years. Right?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I think that's such an important point about the explainability,
Yes.
but also the traceability, verifiability, right? That we're
Yes.
seeing trip up so many of the now value-add AI use cases of data sharing and data analysis.
Right. I mean, the topics, right? We look at the fentanyl issues, disaster, but also as we heard from the keynote opening, right? If we think we're going to be in a kinetic situation in 2027, then we've got the warfighter out there, and we think about lat long of targets. Their targets matter, and what I've seen today, it's still pretty much what I call operational SCFF, which is swivel chair, fat finger, right? And that's not good. And we've got to help them, but also we can't just turn around and say the machine told us, right? That target, because that target is a not to get too point on that, but you know what I'm saying, it has to be pretty accurate all the way through, and there has to be interoperability throughout the entire data management lifecycle.
I think we would all agree accuracy is important, for sure.
Yes.
Okay, well, let me shift gears a little bit, Dean, and have you talk a little bit about how you manage some of these trust and governance issues, especially given that you're bringing together, really sitting in the middle of public sector, trying to deliver public sector value, but as I understand it, you have to sing for your supper too, right?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, we do. Look, we have a really very different experience with government and industry. And actually, Marie, our friends from Geoscience, we were having coffee this morning actually and just talking about some of the challenges with really collaborating across the larger government agencies to move data into the space to make it really usable. But what's really important, I think, we had to, I'll come back to this point of remodelling our business. The thing that was really important to us was that we make data available. As a business, we were aggregating data and information from all of our states and territories, all of the governments across the country, and creating a national data asset. We were creating data products that were sitting effectively on the supermarket shelf, and they weren't really fit for purpose. And we did that for 20 years as an organisation, and we had to reinvent. The market's moving, customers are moving, partners are moving, and they require very different sort of operating models these days. And so, we focused on how do we think about the value chain of our business, and we were very good at location information. And then we thought, as you move up the value chain, how do we create interoperability? And so as a business, we used to sell all of our data effectively, or distribute our data, I should say, via resellers. And part of the challenge with that was always downward pressure on margins, which never helped. But the real challenge was that we weren't innovating as an organisation because we were at arm's length to the conversation, to the use case, understanding what the community and what the customer really needed. And so that was a big part of our thinking around what are the big challenges across the country that we can really help solve as an organisation. So climate management, insurance accessibility, housing affordability, defence, national security, citizen services. And so you start to put these, start to put that into the scope of our vision every day when we turn up to work, and you start to turn up with real purpose. And then as the business evolved, we knew that, like I said, we were very good at location intelligence, but we needed to move further along the value chain to create real value. And as I said earlier, we're at the beginning of this hockey stick curve. We can all see the growth in the marketplace, and we can all see that, and I'm, as an outsider looking in, I've always seen geospatial as a capability, not an industry, because it's required across so many different industries. No offence to anybody, by the way, but that's just how we view it. So to move on from just being great at location intelligence, we started thinking about interoperability, exactly that. So the value chain looks like this. It's location intelligence, it's integration, and then it's insight. And what we realise is that the customer's always just trying to unlock insight. So how do we create more value in the integration piece in the middle? And that's how we sort of started to think about remodelling our business. And to do that, you're right, we had to get a lot of trust from a lot of different data suppliers to create the right data assets, but then trust in our systems to integrate, to create that interoperability, right? So what customers and partners want is to unlock the insight. They want the ability to have what we call application-ready data. And so we've kind of moved further along the value chain to kind of think about how we kind of focus on interoperability of, working with customers and our partners, to focus, to help the focus more on the outputs, the outcomes, the business intelligence that most of our partners and customers need. So we've been on a real journey for the past few years, and we're still going through that. That won't stop anytime soon, because as you can all experience, the expectation on the partner, customer side and government side and the community side continues to evolve, and it evolves at hyper speed.
And as I understand it, it's actually the private sector users that really create most of your revenue and therefore kind of subsidize some of the
It's about
public use?
50-50. So we're about 50-50 revenue split on public and private, but the private sector just moves a lot quicker. And just another really quick example, in Australia, from January 1, mandatory climate reporting is a requirement from the government on your emissions and carbon outputs. That then flows through into your financial accounting, so forth. And that will have material impact on companies in the future. How is climate affecting my business and my assets, and what does the future of that look like, and how will that impact share price of my company over time? However, but they do move quickly. There's, you know, I suppose they've got to place chips and take a bet in some scenarios also, like learn and potentially fail and fail fast. But so they are moving, whereas
they're your early adopters.
Yeah, they are very early adopters, and that's a really big challenge for the country, because all companies will have to report over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. And you know, our focus is on how do we help support that. You know, and this is where interoperability becomes key, because if the biggest companies in the country, like the banks, are scrambling to do it, you can imagine a small to medium enterprise at the other end of the pipe not having the resources to be able to do it. And that's why the interoperability, the collaboration with government, the collaboration with the private sector is really key to what we do.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's a really compelling model. Thank you. So, Florent, Lori has to herd 18 cats, she said, to get this data all kind of shared and collected. You've got a couple dozen more than that in the European Union, member states that are both, I would assume, by treaty and by different agreements, obligated to share different data types. But beyond treaties, like, how do you see the European Union Commission actually creating those incentives to make data more widely available? And do you agree that it's more of a trust issue than a technology issue, or do you think it's a combination?
Well, first of all, yeah, it's certainly a combination, but the EU has gone much further than just creating, inciting the different organizations to share data. We have actually created a whole ecosystem. So the first thing we did, and I'm sorry, I know in the US it's almost a swear word. We regulated the field, but we thought in order to create this ecosystem, we need to make sure that we're all on the same page, and so we have launched this European Data Union strategy many years ago. We have a number of directives like Open Data Directive or Data Governance Strategy, which requires any public authority to compile data according to a certain format that is interoperable, of course, and to make those data available. So that's the regulatory aspect, making sure that everyone is on the same page, and it's really necessary when you deal with 27 different countries. But that's not the only thing we've done. Then we go the step further for the ecosystem. Where do we put all this data? It doesn't make sense to have them on the repository at national level, because then how are the other countries are going to access those data? So we are now creating European data spaces, which are going to host all this data on a thematic basis. So we are creating now the European data space for the Green Deal, which will host all environmental data that will be made available for the community to use, and that will come from all different corners of Europe. And that's not all. We also, as a public service, we're also sponsoring a lot of research for university and private sector to elaborate tools to use those data. And that's where OGC is actually part of a number of research projects like CLINT or Iliad, where together with universities and private actors, we are looking for solutions to how to use the data and make them usable for our community. Iliad is doing the same on oceans, so we're building a digital twin of oceans where the community will be able to access those data to, for example, plan a jellyfish swarm to inform the different localities, or see what is the best location for using the wave energy from the waves. So it's really something that we're insisting on the importance of helping the community to use those data. And it's quite important to also realize that contrary to the US, where you have large data organized, large data private actors, we don't have so many in the EU. So a lot of our users are small and medium enterprise. So that's why it's really important to have this public force creating this ecosystem, which otherwise would not have been built by itself.
Yeah, that's great. So I think in our last few minutes, I actually just wanted to ask you, take the prerogative here and ask you a question. My understanding is the EU data spaces really are more about the legal structures of how the data comes in and is shared. Is that?
So it's both, so it's protected data. So whenever you share the data, you know where it will end and you know how it will be used because it's a public, but it's also interoperability and that it's useful. It's not just the...
Which must create the incentive for more data to come in. Because
absolutely. So then we can welcome data from other part of, exactly. Because when you give data, you have access to the whole, to the whole data set also. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Can't wait to watch how those work out.
Yes.
They're ambitious. Well, we have just a few more minutes. And so I think maybe in closing, I'd love to give everyone just a chance to maybe reflect on one big challenge or call to action that they would like OGC to think about, OGC stakeholders, since it is such an interesting group of people thinking about this. I know, Lilian, we've talked about the fact that from your perch in Los Angeles with the city government, and now that you're at New America and have a little more time to think about things, that you've been focusing on some of the inconsistencies in investment in data infrastructure, right? And as we talk about AI, I work in kind of an adjacent field to geospatial data, thinking about how in low resource countries, public data sector or public data sets and regulated data sets can deliver more value for more people, right? So it's interoperability as well. But as soon as the conversation moves so quickly to AI, that it's incumbent upon us whenever we're speaking with policymakers and donors and partners of countries in other parts of the world, that actually for data or for AI to work for the people that could benefit from it most, the data needs to represent them, right? And so now with half the world just, still either offline or very underrepresented in terms of their digital footprint and transactions, I would say my call to action is to think about this opportunity to kind of build out this really incredible data infrastructure alongside the mechanisms for creating more value from that data. Lilian, how about you first?
Yeah, I mean, well, in any conversation around AI, I love to remind people, and so I'll lunch off of you which one we will not be able to have an AI future if everyone is not actually connected to the internet. We have the kind of speeds and strength and network in order to be able to process all of that information constantly. And then, so we need to invest in the digital divide in the US. And we also, I think to your point, need to actually go back to basics, which is invest in our data and data infrastructure, which in the US context, I love to hear these wonderful use cases from Australia and the EU. I mean, in the US context, we've never really had a national strategy or vision around data and digital transformation, right? We've had siloed federal approaches. We have very disparate state level approaches. And then in cities, which is really where we've had a ton of momentum, but nonetheless, it's also just been very sporadic. And I think what we were chatting about earlier, Kay and I, is just how, unfortunately, it's really administration dependent. and administration at the municipal, state, and national level. And we have to, at some point, reconcile in this country with, if we're going to be a modern power, we have to invest in our digital, in a systemic way, in our digital infrastructure. And we need to have a vision for that. And so I don't know that I have a whole lot of time, but now I get to reflect on my single city operation experience, my multi-city funder experience, and now take a sort of national approach and say, well, what is it that we need in the next 20, 30 years, especially if we want to actually capture the benefits of AI. If we want to do that, then I think we're going to have to invest in our digital infrastructure, and for me, data is obviously at the core of that. And we have to, the challenge though, right, being that we're also going to have to do that in a very rights-preserving way, and with that at the center of it. Because there is a tension, obviously, that is hard to manage, which is with all this access to information, how do we make sure that it's not only secure against external actors, but it's really secure in that there is a norm and a value internally for how government uses that data in a way that is, you know, that lives up to some sort of democratic standard, won't be used against its citizens, et cetera. And that's not just a US challenge, I think that's just a global challenge. And so these are the kinds of issues we need to broach, and that's the kind of work that we think about at New America as we think about ideas of like advancing public interest technology, which is a core part of our work, or as we think about our public policy work where we're advocating for federal privacy in this country, which we still don't have, where we're advocating for a lot of privacy and safety and security measures, which we still don't have. So, that's part of and I think the challenge will always be our federated network, but in some ways, I think actually the opportunity that comes, in this next administration where there's so much tension, but anticipatedly there will be so much tension between the federal, state, and local level, is that you actually can create opportunities with networks like OGC, but also with a lot of these networks like, the governors' associations and leagues of cities and things like that. The challenge still remains, though, that a lot of us and a lot of these institutions, not you all, but a lot of these institutions lack the capacity, the funding, and then the wherewithal to say, we need to do this as part of our global growth strategy. And so I'll be a champion and continue to beat that drum, but I think we need more of us out there saying the same thing, which is we need a unified national vision for this.
That's great. Maybe a national data core, right?
Yeah.
Dean, any last word from you?
Okay, I can see that we're out of time, but no, I echo those thoughts. The important thing for us is to focus on really the social, the economic, environmental impact, that this data really can have, and the interoperability that can support those initiatives. It's having a material impact not only on us in Australia, but we can see that it's happening across the globe, and there has to be better ways. And I think and I think all governments have got tough decisions to make, but they're very serious considerations about the future of the planet, and we just continue to push and do our little bit that every day, and wake up every day with a bit of purpose. But it's really important that we continue to push those larger agenda items with government.
Well, and it really shows the importance of fora like OGC, right? I mean, just like data is non-rivalrous, so is knowledge, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was fascinating. I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but please join me in giving these fabulous panelists a round of applause.